Brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, Assalamu alaikum, peace be on all of you. My goodness, when Lenin said that there were decades when nothing happens, but weeks when decades happen, he had this year in mind. Cast your mind back. Just 14 months ago, myself and my comrade Ron Mackay, on our re-emergence from besieged Gaza, where we had once again broken the illegal siege on the people there, we were arrested by the goons of somebody you may remember called Hosni Mubarak. They bundled us into a van and sped towards the airport, where they confined us, even following us to the restroom, as you folks oddly describe it. We got no rest from them. And at the door of the aircraft, out stepped a factotum from the foreign ministry of Mubarak's regime and declared that I was henceforth persona non grata, which means a person without status, that I was being deported from Egypt, and that I would not be allowed to return ever. He added, ever. I told the man, I felt a little guilty afterwards because he was only the messenger. I said, the day will come when the real persona non grata in Egypt is the gangster for whom you work, Hosni Mubarak, who will, if he's lucky, flee the country with his billions, leaving people like you to face the music, face the wrath of the Egyptian people, the great people of the greatest of all Arab countries. He looked a little shamefaced, I like to think, but he was, as they said on another occasion, merely doing his duty. And so it seemed. I was banned from Egypt forever. But of course the day came even quicker than the most optimistic of us could have expected, when this regime was swept away, when Mubarak's assets were frozen, having been counted at the last count at more than $80 billion. It's not a bad salary for President of the Republic of Egypt for 30 years. Of course, the banks who froze his assets were happy to bank his assets until a few weeks before, and the governments that belatedly clucked about his tyranny, bankrolled and buttressed and armed and supported in every way that dictatorship almost until the final hours of it. So things change fast when they begin to change. Cast your mind back. The same 14 months, I was banned from Canada. Forever. Forever. I was banned from Canada, from Jason Kenney, forever. Now Jason Kenney seems to be in a bit of trouble. I mention it not to take what the Germans call Schadenfreude, pleasure in the discomfiture of others, but merely to make the point that all things must pass, all tyrants must pass, and let's hope Jason Kenney passes very soon indeed. And yesterday and the day before, I was in Calgary, which is the constituency of the said Jason Kenney, where people turn out in their hundreds, many hundreds, to hear me speak, and where we launched on Saturday night Viva Palestina Canada, which will soon become a national organization, but will forever be linked with Jason Kenney's backyard. You may think I'm rubbing it in, but that's the sort of guy I am. And I can tell you today that the finest lawyers in Canada have begun my legal action against Jason Kenney and his factotum. We will sue them for millions of dollars, and every cent that we get will be spent here in Canada building an even stronger anti-war movement than we already have here. It's bliss for someone like me to be alive this year of revolutions. For 35 years or more, I have worked, dreamed, prayed, beseeched the Arab masses from the Atlantic Ocean to the Persian Gulf, from Morocco to Bahrain, to rise up and overthrow the dictatorships placed upon them and kept upon them mainly by Western countries, because I believed that the Arabs would never fulfill the enormous potential that they have, which is mind-boggling. Think of that landmass from Morocco to Bahrain, all that sea, all that ocean, the ocean of petrol and gas, 350 million people speaking one language. In the European Union, we speak 300. In the Arab lands, one language, more or less, one religion, one God, one culture. This is a potential superpower which ought to be vital in every international arena and issue, but which is instead a basket case of ineffectual, pathetic inability to even put bread on the table of the people of their countries. And there are some things which surprise even me. I learned just in the last couple of weeks that Yemen is the poorest country in the world. How can that be? How can an Arab Muslim country next door to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, how could that country be the poorest country in the world? What kind of Islam, what kind of Arabism is that? It is indeed a shame. In Egypt, half of the people, that's 40 million people, therefore 40 million. What's the population of Canada? 25? 25 million of you. 40 million Egyptians are living on less than $2 a day, not knowing if there's food tomorrow, if there's shelter tomorrow. This has been the reality for so many Arab countries. But as those conscious of nuclear physics will know, when a critical mass has been achieved, a chain reaction, a nuclear explosion will follow. And that critical mass turned out to have been achieved when a young man in Tunisia, of all places, set fire to himself in an act of self-immolation which turned out to be the spark which burned down the dictatorships of the Arab world. His name, Abu Aziza, will live forever, and the pioneering way in which the Tunisian people brought down their tyrant in what was, even by Arab world standards, one of the grimmest police states in the region. The way in which they were not fooled that just by the president running away, that meant that their job was done. Who returned in their hundreds of thousands again and again and again to the streets and the squares of Tunisia, until one by one, the ministers of the previous dictatorship fell on their swords and left the public stage. And last week, the RCD, the dictatorship party of Tunisia, was dissolved by decision of the High Court of Tunisia. Once it was all powerful, only months, less than 3 months ago, less than 12 weeks ago, it was all powerful, and now it no longer exists. This is what democracy looks like. And of course, this democratic spring spread to the greatest of all the Arab countries. And again, the Egyptian masses in their millions, they struggled might and main until this 30-year pharaoh, phony, fake, tin pot pharaoh, was removed from the scene, fleeing with his ill-gotten gains to we know not where. Maybe Israel. After all he did for them, it's probably the least they could do for him. But his assets now frozen. The police seeking to interview him about how he and his family garnered this extraordinary wealth. The son, Gamal, who until 9 weeks ago was a shoo-in, a cert to be the next president of Egypt, giving us another 30 or 40 years of Mubarak dynasty, will be lucky to escape imprisonment or worse at the hands of the Egyptian people. And very soon, the so-called National Democratic Party, which is neither national nor democratic nor a party, the rubber stamp of the Mubarak years, will itself face the fate of the RCD in Tunisia. But again, there were many who tried to manage this Egyptian revolution, to say, well, the president has gone, long live the vice president. The vice president was the torturer-in-chief of the Mubarak dictatorship. Omar Suleiman, the jailer of the Palestinian people in Gaza, the divider of the Palestinian national movement, and the torturer of the people of Egypt. But the people came back to Tahrir Square, to the avenues of Alexandria, to Suez, even to Al Arish, a place I know well. Every town and city and region in Egypt came back over and over again, until one by one the ministers of the dictatorship were swept away. Omar Suleiman, the interior minister, now on trial for torture and corruption. The Prime Minister, Ahmed Shafiq, appointed in the last few days by Mubarak, trying to cling on, now swept away. The military junta, whom the West hoped might be able to hold the ring so that they could emerge with something from this revolutionary upheaval, have been confounded. Let me say this, and I say it with certainty and conviction. No future government of Egypt ever again will play the role of Israel's jailer of the Palestinian people. The siege on Gaza is finished. Hallelujah. The gates are open, and even if not declared, because this is an interregnum, when a democratic government comes to power in Egypt, it will be declared all right. And I say to the supporters of Israel in the room, it's time to listen carefully. Your days of murdering, torturing, jailing, occupying, starving, dispersing the Palestinian people are almost over. And it's time for you to listen very carefully indeed. The siege, whether declared or not, is finished. The role of the Egyptians in dividing the Palestinian national movement is finished. And when sometime in the future, I refer not to the farcical so-called peace process that is now dying in the sands of the Middle East, having been on life support for many, many long years. Endless process, no peace, because no justice. No justice, no peace, however elaborate your process. But one day, this matter will return to the international agenda, and one day there will be negotiations again. But from now on, the Palestinians will be immeasurably strengthened by an Arab world that is now Arab, by an Islamic Arab world which now regards itself with self-respect and demands the respect of others. So everything just changed utterly. The Arab regimes that were collaborating with Israel, leaving the Palestinians alone to face all of these crimes. Now there is one Arab people from the Atlantic to the Gulf, and all is changed utterly. Of course, the revolution isn't over, either in Tunisia or Egypt. It's certainly not over in Yemen, where the president has been in for 33 years. 30 for Mubarak, 33 for Ali Abdullah Saleh, the president of Yemen. But his days are coming to an end, as the vast majority of Yemenis in the poorest country in the world decide that enough is enough. It's certainly not over in Bahrain, where the Prime Minister, I'm not making this up, the Prime Minister of Bahrain has been the Prime Minister since 1961. That's before the Beatles. Before the Beatles, who've been wound up for 40 years. This man has been the Prime Minister. Eat your heart out, Gaddafi. 1961 to 2011. Of course, it helps that he's the uncle of the king. And the king has been in power, or his family have, absolute power, for 231 years. Now that's a long time. But the masses are moving so decisively in Bahrain that this day, the unfreest country on the earth, Saudi Arabia, dispatched thousands of soldiers and a long armored column of military armor, tanks and other weaponized transport across the causeway in a show of support, the news said, for the beleaguered Bahraini royal family. What a gruesome twosome. The court corpse-like kings of Arabia, clinging together in their last days. And what happened today on that causeway? Remember that you heard it here. Saudi Arabia just lit a touch paper which will set a fire in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, which happens to be highly combustible, where all of the oil and gas is. And this interference, this invasion, that's what it is, this invasion and occupation of Bahrain will be the beginning of the end of Al Saud, as well as the beginning of the end of the Bahrainis. It's certainly not finished in Libya, where Gaddafi, the brute Gaddafi, and his son, looking like a high-end drug dealer off HBO's The Wire. Didn't they notice the resemblance? Stringer Bell, Saif al-Islam, they could have been played by the same man. The Gaddafi family business, for that's what it is. 42 years in a country now of 6 million, before of 2 million, 3 million, with an ocean of gas and oil. Every Libyan should be a multi-millionaire. The public realm in Libya should be like Beverly Hills. The hospitals, the schools, everywhere, the streets, the lights, everything should be of the highest order. And anyone who's ever been to Libya walks around with their mouth open, asking themselves at least, where did all the money go? Well, a lot of it went into the pockets of the Gaddafi family and clique. 8 sons, all of them billionaires. Do the maths. And of course, a lot of it went on purchasing the loyalty of foreign mercenaries, now being ruthlessly deployed to crush the freedom movement in Libya. The West is now plunged into chaos. They don't know which dictators to back and which dictators to sack. Total, absolute chaos. And worse from their point of view, they decided, having backed Gaddafi, now to sack him just before he appeared to win the war. So Gaddafi is now back, whilst the West tried to get rid of him. What's going to happen now? What's the relationship going to be now? Is there going to be 2 Libyas? Is there going to be any so-called no-fly zones? Which of course are meaningless, but give the impression of doing something. It's too late. The dictatorship of Gaddafi has won for now, but the people will be back, because the burning desire for freedom. You know, it used to be claimed, friends of Israel used to say, Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East. Well, that depended which end of the telescope you were looking through, of course. If you were an Israeli Jewish citizen, yes, you had a perfect democracy. If you were an Israeli Arab citizen, you had rather less perfect democracy. If you were one of the millions of Palestinians militarily occupied for 44 years, you had no democracy at all. And if you were one of the millions of Palestinian refugees driven from their homes and living out miserable lives as refugees in neighboring countries and further beyond, you had no democracy of any kind. But insofar as Israel was a democracy, we didn't realize, most of us, that that depended on the Arabs being forced to live under dictatorship so that that claim could be made. Israel opposed each and every one of these Arab revolutions for the reasons or the obverse of the reasons I earlier adumbrated. They are terrified of Arab democracy because an Arab democratic government will never forget Jerusalem, will never forget Palestine. There are other countries not yet moving, but as one domino after another falls, it is bliss to be alive in this year of revolutions, 2011. And Jason Kenney, it won't be complete until you're out of office too. Wassalamu alaikum. Thank you very much.